Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 126 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. I've got Mike Koomar with me. And, Mike, we've got a lot of stuff to get to here. We've got a full weekend of hoops that we need to recap. We've had some early action this week. We're recording this Wednesday night. We had some big games Tuesday, and then we'll get ahead to preview some of this weekend's games. But Mike, probably the number one storyline from the weekend. I mean, there's a lot to pick from here, but let's go to the Research Triangle in North Carolina. It's probably the best rivalry in the game, renewed once again. Duke goes to Chapel Hill. They lead for 39 minutes and 59 seconds, but Seth Trimble hits a big-time three, and UNC sort of comes out of nowhere to steal this one. So it's UNC 71, Duke 68. North Carolina gets that win that they need to sort of propel themselves up towards the protected seeds. And Duke, once again, sort of pisses away a game from a winning position. So what were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think this was kind of interesting. This was the first game that was kind of coming down the stretch for Duke in quite some time. You look all the way back in early January, you look at that SMU game, they won by 7. But even that game, still, like, it never really got that close. It always really felt like SMU was going to lose that one. Duke was always in control. You fast forward to this game, look, things got a little bit tight. Duke wasn't making shots coming down the stretch and completely folded. You hope for Duke that this is just kind of a one-off thing, but definitely, I think a disadvantage for them being in the ACC is that they're not going to be battle tested going into the tournament as much as some other teams. They might be fresher, but they're not playing the same caliber of opponents that the teams in the Big Ten and the Big 12 are playing. And it kind of seemed to show when coming down the stretch against a really good uh, Carolina team.
And in terms of Duke, this was just their second loss of the year. Mike, if you remember their first loss to Texas Tech, I believe it was at the Garden in December. It
Yeah.
was very similar fashion, where they led
Yep.
by double digits for three-quarters of the game, and then the other team went on a run late and sort of took it from them. So I think there are some late game stuff for Duke that we might have to monitor, but like you said, there's only going to be a handful of games where that might even come into
Yeah.
possibility. Cam Boozer was really good with 24 and 11, but other than him, just 18 of 41 from the field and 5 of 15 from 3. It seems like that they might have a little bit of an identity crisis of who's the second guy for Duke. I guess, the every guy, a different guy every night thing can work sometimes, but especially now that Boozer is a post, like it is really easy to get the ball out of a post's hands. So Isaiah Evans has been that guy at times. Foster, Sarr. And what feels like Duke needed that second guy to step up. And while Sarr was second with 13 points, he only shot 6 shots, and I think 5 of them were corner shots. So I think Duke might need that secondary scorer to step up here so they can win, close games, especially if they're on the road.
I think a big concern for Duke right now is your lack of depth. So realistically, they're playing 7 guys the entire game. Caden Boozer's getting about 15 minutes a game. Malik Brown's getting considerable time off the bench. But if you get an injury or a couple guys in foul trouble in a big game, you could find yourself in a world of hurt. Now, given this year in college basketball, we've seen games called more physically because there are a lot of teams that are only playing 7, 8 guys deep right now. But with that being said, Duke needs some more production, I think, from their guys on the bench as well, if they're going to be successful, because you can't burn Cameron Boozer and company for 38 minutes a night every single night when you're going through an ACC tournament and through March Madness. It's just not going to work.
And in terms of the winners, Mike, at North Carolina, Caleb Wilson, who is in that group of freshmen that is the best freshman class ever, he leads the way with 23. He plays every single second of this one. Henry Vasar, 13 and 11, including some huge, I think every single one of his points came in the second half. Tremble with 16. The supporting cast gave Wilson a little bit more help than the other side for Boozer. And Wilson really kept them in the game here early on. I think it was 20-8 Duke, and Wilson sort of hit a couple of hero shots to get Carolina back in this game, and then everything else sort of opened up for the other players when there was a point where they were doubling Wilson on the catch, which
Yeah.
we have seen from time to time, but he's proven that he is sort of a unique scorer in the fact that he is a post player, but he also faces up and takes players off the bounce too. So I think Wilson has stepped up big time, and North Carolina got themselves over the line for their signature win.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, North Carolina followed that up with a loss this
Yep.
week to Miami. That was not very good, but at the end of the day, the win here way outweighs the loss against the Hurricanes. I think right now is you got to look, Caleb Wilson can't be doing that every single night. He put that team on his back. He had 40 minutes in that game, played every single second, and he had some really key players on his supporting cast. Look, Carolina, I think they're good enough on their best day to compete for a Final Four. It's just going to be, can they replicate that coming down the stretch? Look, they were really hot for a minute there. They had that big win at UVA. We saw that game live, Sean. A dominant win at Georgia Tech, and then took care of business at home against Syracuse before upsetting Duke. So, they just need a little bit more consistency. They were a little bit ambushed by Miami. Miami led for pretty much that entire game. So I think that's a little bit of a concern for the Tar Heels, but don't want to rain on their parade. It was a great win over the weekend against their arch rival.
Yeah, obviously you go into these two games, and I think every single one of them would have taken 1 out of 2. But the
Yeah,
Miami game, it's a very dangerous spot, Mike, when you play like a bubble caliber team on the road.
yeah.
Sometimes it's not even a contest, and the better team just goes in there and rolls. But Miami going into this game was in a desperate spot where I had them out of the field because they hadn't beaten anybody of at large caliber. Well, that has
There
now
you go.
changed.
Yeah.
So I think this is the sort of thing that is holding North Carolina back from being a protected seed, in my opinion. Is that yeah, they're 19-5 right now, but if they're it's sort of projecting, but not at the same time. Like they have not. Obviously, they've played a ton of good teams, ton of tournament caliber teams, but they have not really been anywhere near um, similar
Be,
types of performances.
to be honest, 8-4 is not that good in the ACC. It's just it's not this year. I don't think that's protected seed worthy.
And
Now,
in
if they
terms
continue
of
to win,
their schedule, Mike, like their 4 losses are on the road to 4 tournament bubble plus teams: SMU, Stanford, Cal, and Miami. All 4 of those teams are very similar in the
yeah,
fact that, like, yeah, you won at Virginia, yeah, you beat Duke, but like if you can do that, then you should be able to at least go 2 out of 4 in those games, and they went 0 out of
100%.
4. And
Yeah,
coming up for them, I think it's certainly they play NC State on the road, Louisville at home, Virginia Tech at home, Clemson at home, and then Duke away. Like they've got more of these games. So if this sort of rhythm continues, they're going to lose a couple more games before the ACC
yeah.
tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say this was kind of like the perfect storm for UNC coming down the stretch.
Yeah.
It took Caleb Williams playing 40 minutes, Trimble getting hot. Like it was the perfect storm for a comeback, and Duke kind of fell apart. They can't do that night in and night out. And I think that's kind of what they were a little bit exposed. Visar also had a hell of a second half in that one. They're going to have more sustained success, and be a little bit more consistent.
All right, Mike. Well, let's go to the SEC. A few teams and storylines that I want to hit from the weekend. It's just a total bloodbath, and I mean that in a good way and a bad way because they're all just sort of beating each other up. And Florida's probably the best team in the league, and they've already lost 6 times this year. But Saturday had a couple of interesting headlines from the SEC. Let's start in Alabama, where Alabama went to Auburn and won in the jungle. And now we know this. Now, this was Charles Bediako's last game. And as of now, this game counts. So Alabama pick up a quad one road win and give Auburn a home loss, which they ultimately lost at home again to Vanderbilt on Tuesday. And all of a sudden,
Yeah.
Stephen Pearl and Auburn are 14-10. They weren't really
Who would
all
have
that
thought?
close to the bubble last time I did bracketology, but that was 2 losses ago. So I think they might be a little bit closer to the cut line than people realize. So obviously, we did talk at Alabama at a little bit of length in our Bediako video, but they picked up a big win here. In Auburn, it was a big missed opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, taking a look at Alabama, this is a game that is really important for them. They had been sliding for a while. I haven't really, I mean, this is their biggest win in conference play. They did beat Kentucky earlier on in the year. Kentucky's gotten a lot better since that game, but this was definitely the biggest impact game and a game that could turn around your season for Alabama, who had been struggling significantly going into this game. They've got Ole Miss right now, but it's going to be kind of a similar story for them. When they can score the basketball, they're going to be successful. But especially without Bediako, we talked about this at length last night, Sean. They're not going to be as productive on the defensive end, and they're already a bad defensive team when you have one less rim protector averaging about 22 minutes a game. So I think that's really just the question mark for the Crimson Tide. You're not going to be able to score 100 points every single game in March. So how are you going to sustain, keep your opponents from those numbers?
So another team, Mike, that had a little bit of an up and down week, it's Vanderbilt. They lose at home to Porter Moser to Oklahoma, where they lose by one. But I texted you about this, Mike. This was the fakest comeback of all time.
Yeah,
They
they had
were
no shot.
never in position to win this game, down by double digits for most of it, and they hit a three with like a second and a half left to make it a 1 point game. But that was a little bit of an alarming loss. But then they followed up with a win at Auburn, which is quad one. So where are you at with
Yeah.
Vanderbilt here? Is it just sort
And
of going to be a mixed bag the rest of the way for the Doors?
keep in mind that Auburn game, look, they won it by 8 points, but that game was dominated by
Yeah.
Vanderbilt. Like Auburn didn't really feel like they had a chance. And meant to get to Auburn a little bit on that previous part. Look, we kind of called it from the this get go after they had that uh, barely win over Bethune Cookman at the start of the year. But this team is just not getting it together. 3 straight losses. They have that big win at Florida. That's probably the only reason that they're still a tournament team right now. But they're going to have to get things together quickly. On the other side of that coin of that game, you look at Vanderbilt. There's just so much inconsistency with Vanderbilt right now. Look, they didn't shoot the ball well that great on Saturday against Oklahoma, but then they get into this game. They're more efficient offensively. They get two players with or four starters in double digits in this one. They're able to move the ball well and get a pretty easy win. With that being said, it seems like we don't know which Vanderbilt we're going to get. Are we going to get the good one or the bad one? I had, said a couple of weeks ago that I could have seen them drop into a 7 or 8 line, and I think that's out there, right? Like I don't think that's going to happen. But that Vanderbilt team that is an 8 line shows up sometimes, and they lose to Oklahoma by giving up 92 points.
And really, both Auburn and Vanderbilt's resumes are in an interesting spot. Like they've picked up a lot of good wins already, both of them, and you can't take those away. But like I feel like we've seen teams that were protected seeds all year, like Vanderbilt in this situation, and if they slip to a 5 or 6 seed, like that is prime upsetville right there. And I'm not saying that it's going to happen yet, but say Miami, Ohio gets to go against them, or um, somebody like
The 11
Liberty,
through 13 line is strong this year, really strong.
and they all do have to go through and win their conference tournaments, which last
Yeah.
year I feel like it did happen. Other years it hasn't, and then of course if you're bringing teams that are 13 and 14 seed caliber up, then maybe not. But I think the SEC is a mess. I think it'll be interesting to see how they are seeded. Most of the teams' good wins are, or most of the conference's good wins are against each other. But in terms of Auburn, Mike, 14-10, like I said, I still think they're in the field, but this record cannot get closer than it is now to 500. Like they beat St. John's at Players Era. They have a win over fellow bubble team NC State. They have big losses to Arizona and Purdue. They lost to Georgia, who's a fellow bubble team. They lost to Texas A&M at home, who's a roughly bubble team. They did beat Arkansas, but then they lost to Missouri, who's a bubble team. They did win at Florida, but then they lose to Tennessee. They lost to Alabama, now Vanderbilt. So I feel like this is something that, if they're 4 or 5 games over 500, they're going to be an 8 or 9 seed because their wins are just going to be too good to ignore. But if they get, like, let's say 15 losses and they're 17-15 or 18-15, I could see them being left out in the fact that they just don't have enough wins and too many losses. So
Yeah.
I think that's something to monitor going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at the trajectory of this conference right now, I think you're looking at 13 to 14 losses on the
At
season
least.
for this Auburn team.
And then if you add
I don't
a
think they've got a shot against Arkansas on
and then if you
Saturday
add
on the
a
road.
tournament loss in there, that's how I got to 15.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where it's going to be tough because look, they've got Arkansas on the road. Kentucky's hot right now. They're playing good ball. They've got them at home. They've got at Alabama. I think those are 3 losses right there, and that's not even taking into account that they still got to play Ole Miss. That's a good ball club right there, or anything in the SEC tournament. So, look, Stephen Pearl's got his hands full. He's got to win a couple of these big time games coming up if he wants to be playing back in March Madness this year.
And in terms of last year, Texas got in at 18-15. They had 7 quad 1 wins,
Yeah,
which in the committee's opinion was too good to ignore. I thought they should have been left out. So did
they should have
everybody
been left
else.
out. Yeah.
But this year, Mike, I feel like they have 4 right now. But if they have, like, if they're 6-12 in quad 1, let's say, I feel like that could be not, like, disregarded, but, like, yeah, you have 6 wins. You had 18 tries. So, like, I don't know if Texas situation last year is completely, like, 100% comparable to this Auburn team, but that Texas team lost 7 home games in the conference last year, and they made the tournament, and and then they
Yeah.
they they picked up a couple of crazy road wins, and then they won a bunch of games in the SEC tournament. But
That yeah,
I
that
don't
Texas
think
team was
I don't think I'm ready to make that the rule. I think that was the exception.
yeah, I think that was the exception. That Texas team, if we're being honest, was one of the worst at-large teams to make the NCAA tournament in the history of the event. Like that was asinine that they got in. They got in and they got crushed in the preliminary round. But I think Texas is another interesting team in the SEC to
This
talk
year
about.
their resume is not a whole lot different.
It's not a whole lot different, but they've won 4 of their last 5. They've got given they've been against easier opponents so far, but they've also got a couple of good wins. They won in Tuscaloosa. They won against Vanderbilt. I think they were Vanderbilt's first loss of the year. They beat fellow bubble team NC State as we talked about. They had a couple of tough games in the out of conference that they probably shouldn't have lost. Arizona State is not a good loss, uh, but you look at the rest of the way. Look, if they beat at Missouri and LSU their next 2 games, um, I think they've got a really good chance of creeping into that bubble going into the last 2.5 weeks of the season.
Yeah, they're going to be a team that's going to. I'm going to sort of, I do sort of flush the numbers every time I do it, but I think I'm going to have to reevaluate them a little bit. 15-9, 6 games over, I think will probably be enough for them. But
Yeah,
like you said, that's easier said than done. But for them, they've got 2 quad 1A wins, 2 more in quad 1B. They are just 1-2 in quad 2 and a quad 3 loss. So that puts them at. They just have 7 wins in meaningful games, and they have 9 losses. So top 3 quads is meaningful games. They're 7-9 in those. No team has ever gotten in with under 500 in meaningful games. Now Texas last year was exactly 500 in meaningful games, and that was the
yeah,
first time that happened. So Texas is gonna have to win. Like the benefit for them, even if it's a quad 3 home game against Mississippi State, for example, which they don't have on the schedule because they already lost it. But a quad 2 and 3 win would mean a lot to them. But I think Auburn and Texas are a teams that I think you could really see move around the seed line a lot, even though we're 75 to 80% through the season. Um, They just have, well, they have two home games against non-tournament teams left, and then every other game is a quad one, Mike. So I don't know, that meaningful games record we're gonna have to look at for Texas, and we've gone in depth in a couple of SEC teams here. This, like I said before, this conference is a mess. I do think we can both agree, Mike, that Florida's the best team in this league, right?
Hands down, not even close.
So the tougher question is who's number two.
Yeah. Whew. It just depends on the night. There, and
It
part of it
really
is
it
there's
really
just
does.
a lot of a chaos of mediocrity here at the number two line in the SEC. Look, I certainly don't think it's Texas A&M. I think we can throw them out the door. So I think you're really talking about is it Arkansas, Kentucky, or Vanderbilt? And a couple of weeks ago, if you'd said Kentucky is the second best team in the SEC, you probably would have been laughed off the internet. But right now, they're certainly the second hottest team in the
Yeah.
SEC. And that's good enough for me to put them number two. I'd probably put Arkansas three and Vanderbilt fourth. Um, but you just never know any given Saturday. Um, you know, I think you got to put Kentucky over Arkansas right now, especially because of how good that win was at Bud Wall.
And I
So
think
yeah, I
for
think Kentucky's number two.
for Kentucky, Mike, the reason why they were so inconsistent earlier and is why their metrics are lacking a little bit is because when they lose, it was ugly.
Yeah,
I feel
yeah,
like
40-point loss to Gonzaga, a
yeah,
few other ugly ones.
and even as their last loss, Vanderbilt, 25 points.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
like I don't even think they have to win in Gainesville on Saturday. If they can make it a game, like they might be
yeah,
the second best team in the league if they make it a game.
yeah.
And then in
But
terms
and you
of
look,
it's just very inconsistent from teams 2, 3, and 4, which are probably Arkansas, Vanderbilt, and Kentucky, but that order of that is totally random.
yeah, 100%. And especially like all these teams are so, Vanderbilt, what you talked about, 25-point win over Kentucky, they go completely crash out at home and lose to Oklahoma. It's just like we don't know it's chaos of mediocrity, really,
Yeah,
in the
and
SEC
it'll
right now.
probably make for a fun conference tournament. Um,
Yeah,
we'll
could
definitely
get could get
be,
interesting.
and being
Yeah.
with so many teams, Mike, that are primed to be on the bubble, we might have a pseudo playing game here in believe it's in Nashville.
Yeah, it's in Nashville.
Yeah.
Yep, it's at
So
Bridgestone. And look, don't be surprised if somehow one of these teams from the middle of the pack comes out of nowhere and makes a run. Like
yeah,
this could be a tournament that Texas or Missouri or even Georgia or Ole Miss kind of comes out of nowhere and takes this tournament by storm and potentially steals a bid.
and
Um,
somebody else takes out Florida
yeah,
and clears the path for you. I think this is definitely
and
the most interesting conference tournament. And while it may not be the most relevant after Friday, or I believe the SEC ends, I don't know if they
Saturday,
end
I think.
Saturday or Sunday, but after the
Yeah,
bubble teams play their first game, it probably won't mean a lot for the committee, but it'll still be pretty cool because,
yeah,
like you said, Mike, I think there are legit 11 teams that can win this conference tournament.
yeah, 100%.
All right, well,
100%.
we've got a couple of other headlines that I want to hit here from Saturday. And well, we'll sort of loop them all in with the conference that they're in. This was a game that I streamed pretty late at night, Mike. It was Houston going on the road in Provo and beating BYU. It's sort of been a pretty quick skid here for the well, they're both the Cougars, and I ran into that a
Right.
few times on stream. The BYU, they all of a sudden have lost a ton of basketball games and they don't have a quad 1A win. They don't have a elite win. They are at 18-6. They,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say they were outclassed by Houston, but I don't think Houston was ever going to lose. BYU had that nice push in the second half to tie the game, but then Houston sort of punched right back. So I know you had a crazy tough run of games, but you do lose 5 out of 6. And where are you at with BYU here? I think it's clear they're definitely a tier below the top of the Big 12, but is it even more than that?
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, and that was a pretty big skid, four straight. You would have thought that they could have gotten the win against Oklahoma State, but look, Oklahoma State's an incredibly inconsistent team, and they
Yeah.
brought their stuff against BYU. But this is just such a tough conference, Sean. I mean,
Yeah.
you looked at it; they have three losses. Three of those four losses are against top 10 teams in the country. One of them being the number one team in the country. right? It's just like this is such a tough conference.
And the
It's
other
not even
beating the team
close.
that just beat the number one team in the country. Yeah.
Exactly. And look, they got it back on track against Baylor. They were down big early. Rob Wright really shut up the crowd there in Waco. Had 30 of his own. DeBonsa was really good. He was a player that they weren't sure how long he could be out for with injury, but he was back against the Bears, and they're going to get another easy win probably this weekend against Colorado. But it doesn't get much easier after that. Look, they got to go play Texas Tech, Central Florida, uh, ISU, and Arizona coming down the stretch at Arizona. So those are four tournament teams. Those are four tough games. Um, and then they've also got to go onto the road to West Virginia and Cincinnati, who could certainly pick off a game. So there is no other than Colorado this weekend, no more off games for this. Like if one of these, if BYU was in the ACC, we'd be looking at a team that would be probably have two or three losses in conference. But instead, they're in the Big 12. They're probably going to end up with like eight.
And
Um,
yeah,
and, and
but
and and that's the way it is. Look, I think in terms of uh, tiers of this conference, look, I think they're the sixth. They're sixth in the standings right now. That's probably where they ought to be. I
yeah.
think we saw Arizona's exposure this weekend. Those top five teams are all right there. I think Arizona, Houston, Kansas, Iowa State, Tech. Those are clearly the top five teams in the conference. And then there's a pretty big step down. And I think BYU is on a pretty similar level to where Central Florida is.
And I think I'm not saying that they're at risk of falling down to the bubble here. They still have
Right.
5 quad 1 wins. It's a little unfortunate for them that they're all currently in the back half of quad 1, but they're 5-6 in quad 1 and they have no losses
Yeah.
outside of it. Like they're not falling any further below the 6 seed line, but in terms of getting that protected seed, they will need a quad 1A win, especially considering Mike they're going to have a way more chances than the other teams around them. They've already had 5 and they've lost them all, and they're 5-1 in quad 1B. Like it's pretty clear where their level is.
Yeah.
Like the 20th to 15th best team in the country, and yeah, it's hard to beat teams above you, but if you have 8 to 9 quad 1A games, like you probably should win one or two of them to be a protected
Yeah.
seed, which is why I do think it will be tough for them to get to that 4 line.
Yeah, and I will say, like to the point of the credit of the conference, I heard somebody say the Big 12, it's not a gauntlet, it's a slaughter,
Yeah.
and that's really what it is. When you've got five teams in the top 10 right now, in the AP, and all deservingly so. Look, Arizona had probably their first tough game of the conference season this week, and they lost. Um, they lost a tough one, and it ain't going to get any easier for them. I think they in their last six games or so, or last seven games, they play five teams that are in the tournament, probably at a 5 seed or better. So it's just like this is just such a crazy tough conference, and so it's really just who's going to be able to survive at the end of the day.
And the game that you just mentioned, Mike, was on Big Monday, the first day after the Super Bowl, which I think was an important day for college basketball to show out. And I think Tuesday was too, and I think they both did. I mean, two
Oh,
amazing
Tuesday
days
was
of
such a great day.
basketball. And it
Oh,
started off Monday night at the Fog. Arizona going into play Kansas. Kansas was favorites to win the game. Bill Self has never lost on Big Monday. We're hearing all these stats. All these football fans are tuning into this game. And then 7 minutes before tip, uh, somebody, Borzello, I think, breaks the news that Darren Peterson will not be playing for Kansas due to a flu. There's some other rumors out there about, you know, the fact that Bill Self didn't like the effort in practice and got on Darren Peterson. Then he was like, I'm out. But that has not been corroborated yet. But it doesn't matter, Mike. Kansas gets the win without the number one pick in the NBA draft. This was just a typical Fog Allen game. Arizona was winning for most of it, but they couldn't really put them away. And then
yeah.
the crowd drags Kansas across the line at the end. What an awesome
Yeah.
place to be, and what a win for Kansas.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of said you hit the hammer on the nail right there. Fog Allen, if you're going to beat Kansas, you got
Got to
to
beat
beat
him
him
by
by
10.
10. really by 11 because it's a 10-point advantage. And look, Melvin Council had a great game. He played 40 minutes in this one, shot the ball a lot, but
6 of
also
25, yeah.
10 of
He
11 from the line.
but he did
He
other
got to the
things that
line.
impacted winning too.
Yeah. And also 6 assists, 6 rebounds. Asking a guy to play 40 minutes is huge, and he was able to get it done. Look, Kansas effectively played with 6 guys. Yeah, Mabia and Rosario both got in for a couple minutes here and there, but for the most part, um, it was good. And for Arizona on the flip side, look, they had a lot of guys have probably their worst game of the season. Look, Bradley only had 6 points in this one, 5 rebounds, 4 assists. That's a pretty off night for him. Koa Pete also just has 6 points in this one. Koa Pete's, maybe a lotto pick. So it's I think a kind of a victim of circumstances for Arizona. They happen to play some of their worst basketball of the year, and Fog Allen is a tough place to do that because those fans will get after you. The officials tend to be in the favor of the Jayhawks when they're there. It's a 10-point advantage. There's a reason that it's called that.
And
Big win for the Jayhawks. And look, Kansas is a good basketball team right
yeah,
now. They are a really good basketball team. They're the hottest team in the conference, and we were writing them off earlier. They were dropped out of the rankings. Look, this is a team that's going to compete for a 2 seed now in the tournament. What a big win for them.
and Mike, a lot more people, at least in my circle, were watching this game, and Arizona was winning the whole time. And multiple people, I told the same thing. Don't You have to beat Kansas by 10 to beat them at the Fog,
You do.
and they said, "Oh, what does that mean?" You'll see, and ultimately it happened. But
You see
I
it.
think
Yeah.
long term, we could probably do a whole video on this, Mike, at the end of the season. But I mean, what a job that Bill Self is doing with this team.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're not like a bunch of mid-major players, but he has had better teams the last couple of years, and they have not been this good. But he seems to have gotten a team with like a pretty ridiculous situation, honestly, where you have Darren Peterson, then you don't, then you do, then you don't, and he has got this team to buy into the roles that they're in, and they are like a really good basketball team. You add in the fact that they probably have the best home court advantage in the country, and they're able to get across the line here. But in terms of Flory Badunga, excellent jump from year one. He was backing up Hunter Dickinson last year. There were certainly some signs, but he is 100% the best player on this team when Peterson is not there. And then you have
Yeah.
everybody else doing their job. Bryson Tiller is a freshman. Um, we'll have to see, what if he's going to the NBA or not. Melvin Council's a senior that started his career at Wagner. And, he was a solid player there, but then he goes to St. Bonaventure and then Kansas. And then Trey White, journeyman, his Illinois last stop. And then you have Jamari McDowell and Almarco Jackson, who have been sort of role players that have grown up through Kansas. But I think if you're giving Bill Self a choice a couple of years ago, you want the roster with DeJuan Harris, Kevin McCullough, and Hunter Dickinson, or this one. I think people would have picked the other one as being better, but that's not been the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at the job that he's done. A lot of people, critics, including ourselves, thought maybe this could be Bill Self's last season, and he's just putting up an absolute gem this season. They're going to have a really big game. Iowa State's going to have some revenge on their mind, not only from when they played Kansas, but also what happened last night with them getting their second loss in conference. But look, it's just been an incredible job, and to do it with a superstar that has I think at this point probably sat more games than he's played. Been so in and out in big key moments. But clearly, this Kansas team has learned to play without him. They've had struggles along the way throughout the season, and then especially at BYU. Look, they had a dominant lead over BYU, and then when Peterson comes out early second half, that game completely changes. And although they won by 8, it was a whole lot closer than that. So you continue to go down there. Uh, Kansas has improved significantly, and they're looking like a team that even without Darian Peterson, they can make a run.
Yeah, so Mike, he's played 13, they've played 24. But in terms of him finishing the game, he's definitely not been in at the end of more than half the
Yeah,
games because he
yeah,
started, not finished some. And I felt like he was doing a good job of getting some minutes in the tank recently. It looked like that phase of his availability might be behind us, but they say he has the flu here. We'll have to see. But like you said, Mike, they have Cincinnati at home, but Houston, Arizona, Iowa State, and Oklahoma State, and then Arizona State and Kansas State in March. But they've obviously done a terrific job to build their resume here, sort of all recently, and we'll have to see whether they can find their way onto the two line. I think certainly they have to jump Iowa State right now, being in the fact that they
Yeah.
beat them. We'll have to see exactly how things match up,
Well,
but
yeah,
yeah,
we'll
I
see
think
on Saturday.
the last one seed might actually not be out of the question for Kansas either. Being that they already have a win against Arizona, who is still number one overall, and then Iowa State and Houston, who are on the two line. If they can beat them again, that they'll sink them below Kansas. So,
Yeah. Yeah, they got
um,
Houston at home. That's a big one.
and that's guess what, Big Monday. So,
Unbelievable.
you think ESPN part of the Big Monday deal might have been a quote of Kansas games, but we're not in the room for those discussions. But Mike, in
No, we are
terms of the
not.
Big 12, I think the standings obviously do look a little bit different now. Now that the fact that everybody has a loss, and being that clicked on the Big Ten, wrong conference. But how do you see this conference race finishing up? Do you think the top five are all pretty equal and it could go either way, or do you think that I do think Arizona and Houston still have a little bit of an edge, but it might be a little bit closer
Yeah.
than we thought a week ago.
Look, I think I think Iowa State is gonna get a big win on Saturday against Kansas, and three losses might be too much to win this league. We'll see what happens. Look, Houston's got a really tough schedule the rest of the way. They've got Iowa State on the road, Arizona at home, at Kansas. Meanwhile, Arizona's got to play everybody coming down the
Yeah.
stretch, to include Kansas again, I believe. Yeah, they've got Kansas, Brigham Young, Texas Tech, at Houston. I think at Baylor is going to be a tougher game than expected for them. Look, this is really tough because everybody's just got such a hard schedule. You could see like a 3 or 4 way tie at 3 or 4 losses. 15-3, 14-4 in this conference, and both those teams would, or all those teams would deserve a one seed. To be honest, they won't all get it, but it's just this league is just insane once again. So good.
Yeah, I think you'd have to say that the rest of the schedule favors Houston, but that still has a trip to Hilton Coliseum and Fog Allen, and they host
Yeah,
Arizona, like you said, and they go to Gallagher Iba on the last day of the regular season. And based
tough
on what
place to
Oklahoma
play.
State's doing, that might be a desperate spot that they might need to win that game. So
Yeah,
the Big 12 is, I think, a mess, but in a better way than the SEC.
it's a good mess. You
Yeah,
got you got five teams that can win a national championship right now, going at each other's throats. And keep in mind, look, there's still plenty of bubble teams in the Big 12
yeah,
that are looking good right now. TCU just had a huge win yesterday against Iowa State at home, right there. UCF is a very good team. We've seen them play some really good basketball this year. I think they beat Kansas earlier, if I'm not mistaken. Uh, Oklahoma State, they're capable of knocking off somebody. So I mean, those are just three bubble teams, and you've also got BYU in there that can really make things a little weird for everybody involved.
and in terms of I think UCF is bubble in right now. Where if I don't actually think bubble in, I think they're in unless something goes terribly wrong. And then in terms of the other three that I think could make some noise, Mike, West Virginia is 15-9 with two of the other bubble teams in the next three, and in between that, Utah at home. Like if they're able to beat TCU and UCF and Utah and get to 18-9 with wins over the other bubble teams, they're back in the conversation. TCU put themselves back in the conversation yesterday, as you mentioned, with the win over Iowa State. And then Oklahoma State is still there at 16-8 too, with a you know
Yeah.
like they beat Texas A&M. That might be their only big win from the non-con, but they beat UCF already. They beat BYU. They have three wins against the field. So all
Yeah.
the power conferences are going to be involved in the bubble, but it appears that the Big 12, these bubble teams are playing each other. Somebody's going to have to win them. So what is the Big 12 bubble situation going to look like? I think Cincinnati and Baylor like it's 2 good weeks from being in the conversation rather than just one
Yeah,
big
yeah.
win.
That neither of those teams are in the conversation right
Like
now.
TCU wasn't in the conversation until they beat Iowa State. Now they are. I think Baylor
Yeah,
and Cincinnati, like they haven't shown that they're capable of playing better than they have already. And then in terms of the rest of the league, like look, Arizona State, Colorado, Kansas State, Utah, they're not great teams, but they have some wins. Colorado's 4-7 in the Big 12, and they're nowhere
which
near
is
the,
crazy.
the they're nowhere near the middle of this conference.
Yeah. And it's funny, you look at this, Sean. I think West Virginia clearly has had the easiest schedule out of everybody in the
Yeah,
Big 12.
yeah.
Very favorable. When you get to play Case, you only get to play three teams twice in this league, and two of those three for them are Cincinnati and Kansas State. They're not getting to play Houston and Arizona twice like some others
But they don't
team that I
play
know.
any of the top 5 teams the rest of the way, Mike.
Yeah,
At least
exactly.
in the regular season.
Very, very favorable conference outlook for them. And they've taken advantage of that to a degree. A couple of bad losses still, but um, yeah, I mean, if I think they're one of these teams where the resume isn't going to speak the same way that a TCU that plays a little bit tougher schedule in conference does. But they get a win against BYU. They can find a way to beat Central Florida on the road, or TCU on the road. Maybe we're talking about a tournament seed for West Virginia.
And
It's not out of the question.
yeah, they have only one win against the field in my scroll through right now. It's Kansas at home. That's not a bad win to have.
The big one,
But
yeah,
like you said, Mike, they play 3 of their next 4 games are against teams on the bubble. They win them. There's some wins against the field. So, um, yeah, I think I think West Virginia, TCU, Oklahoma State probably out right now, but in the conversation, especially if they can beat each other. But
yeah.
the Big 12 is, a mess in a much better way. You got 5 elite teams, a sixth and a seventh team that are pretty safely in the NCAA tournament right now, and then maybe a eighth or ninth team that can punch their ticket on the bubble. We do have some other headlines, Mike, here, unless you want to add anything finally on the Big 12.
No, I think we've said enough on them.
Okay, let's go to the Big Ten now. We've had a little bit of a development in the title race. Now, there's something going on there right now that might change things a little bit if the team winning is able to hold
Yeah.
on. But we had
Oh,
Saturday, we had a couple of games, Mike. Number one, let's go to Bloomington. Don't think we've talked about this yet, right? It was me and Joe about Indiana.
oh no,
Yeah,
no.
okay. So the Hoosiers host Wisconsin, and we're going to parlay this into what happened with Wisconsin this week. But Indiana gets across the line with a couple of favorable whistles. Number one, a charge. Nick Boyd on Connor Enright. Nick Boyd is definitely one to push off, and he got called for another charge in this game and then a couple in their next game. And then in the ensuing play, while down one, Lamar Wilkerson gets the ball to the hoop. He's kicked in the leg. He goes to the line. Free throws for the win. But I just wanted your thoughts on those last 2 plays.
Yeah, I mean, absolute chaos right there in Bloomington. This was a wild game. Um, it looked like Indiana was just going to kind of cruise coming down the stretch, and Wisconsin's a very physical team. We've noticed that, and I think Wisconsin, maybe it's just the way that they play, a little more beneficial of getting the calls than some other teams. I saw that last night with Illinois. Um, Keaton Wagler was getting beat up pretty good, and wasn't getting many fouls called in his direction. But with that being said, what a huge statement win for the Hoosiers. Finding a way to get eke out a win there when it looked like it had kind of slipped away. That was a big one.
And then up, well, let's see. How are we going to do this? We have Illinois and Michigan State here. Let's go to
Yeah,
that one first. So coming into this game, Mike, Michigan State had lost 2 in a row. We had all the Jeremy Fears incidents where, the fact that it's become a pattern now, it's probably on purpose. Another incident happens in this game where Ivisic or Merkovich, somebody's running back on defense, and Fears pretty clearly goes out of his way to trip him,
yeah,
and all the discourse rises up again. Jeremy Fears, Jeremy Fears. Well, he did have 26 points and 15 assists in this game. As this was pretty similar to the Kansas win over Arizona. Felt like
Yeah.
Illinois was probably the better team on the day. They didn't really push it far enough, and then Michigan State pushed it to overtime and then won the game. But first, I want to get your thoughts on Jeremy Fears and his antics, and then two, how important it was that Michigan State got across the line here.
Look, yeah, I mean, Jeremy Fears' antics kind of rival those of Grayson Allen from a few years ago at Duke. Clearly kind of a dirty player, but at the same time, I mean, what a game that Jeremy
Yeah,
Fears had against Illinois. Single-handedly put his team on his back and found a way to get his team a win. 15 assists to go with his 26 points. That's crazy. Most teams don't have 15 assists and on their entirety in a game, and Fears had 15. So that was incredibly important. But look, Michigan State was sliding a little bit. This game, uh, look, I think Illinois is a better team, and now they've had back-to-back losses, so it's not really reflecting in the standings anymore. But look, I think this is a team that can still certainly compete for the two line, and the schedule gets easier for them for sure. They still got to play at Wisconsin, at Purdue, and at Michigan, which are really tough. And I think they got to go on the road to Indiana as well. So maybe it doesn't get much easier. I'll redact that statement. But it was kind of a must-win game after they kind of fumbled that game against Minnesota on the road at the barn earlier in that week. So very important win for Sparty. You look on the other side of that coin. Illinois Stojakovic. I don't know if he got hurt during that game, but he was not able to suit up for the Fighting Illini when they went to go play Wisconsin. Illinois plays six guys in that game pretty much. They get beat up real good against Wisconsin. Wisconsin was very aggressive. I think borderline dirty in that one. And they find a way to eke out a win in Champaign in overtime. That was a big one for the Badgers.
and in that Michigan State game for Illinois, Mike Wagler, 2 of 16 from the field.
Yeah.
He's a great offensive player. He just had a tough day. He did follow that up with a better performance, but like you said, Wisconsin was able to get across the line. This game script for Wisconsin went the same exact way that it did in Bloomington, except they just got the plays went their way at the end instead of the other way. Like they were
Yeah.
down the whole time at the State Farm Center. Illinois didn't put them away, and then Wisconsin finds themselves with a chance to win it at the end. Blackwell misses, and then they win it in overtime. But I think the real story from this one, Mike, is the fact that Illinois was missing their two best perimeter defenders. Well, no, not their two best perimeter defenders. Their two perimeter defenders. Nobody else does
They're
it.
two only perimeter defenders. Yeah.
And Wagler is too good offensively to guard defensively. Like he's good
Yeah.
enough offensively where you can say, all right, what happens on defense. This is the worst possible matchup to do that because Wisconsin is the best perimeter duo in the conference probably, in Nick Boyd and John Blackwell, and they both had a really good game and it was enough. 25 for Boyd, 24 for Blackwell, and I think if Stojakovic comes back next game, Mike, I don't think there's much to worry about for Illinois, but they could not keep these Wisconsin guards in front, and Craig Gard knew that, and they kept going back to it.
Look, I still think this Illinois team's a Final Four team. Boswell's going to be back soon, and so is Stojakovic. So with a full healthy roster of playing eight guys deep, Illinois is really good. There are
Yeah.
not many teams in the country that are better than them. But also in this game, it kind of to a degree came down to free throws. Look, Illinois is 58% from the free throw line in this game. Keaton Wagler was a 90% shooter. He was 5 of 8 in this one. Uh, Mirkovic was 3 of 6. It really came down to missing a lot of big free throws from the charity stripe. So, look, and we say that to say, this game was not in Illinois' favor, and they still probably should have won. But with that being said, back to the drawing board. It doesn't get much easier because they got a big game versus IU before they have their West Coast swing against UCLA and USC. I think by that time, Boswell should be back, and he could not come back for a bigger moment to take on Michigan. That's going to be a huge game for Illinois, especially if they can win these next three. A win against Michigan, if they can win their next four, and theoretically, the last two games of the season are pretty easy. If they can win out, and not only do they have a chance to win the regular season Big Ten title, but they do legitimately have a shot at a one seed.
And you know, Indiana's a team that's playing as good as they have all year, Mike. In terms of the LA trip, not a single team has gone out there and won both of them.
Yeah,
So, I think, and then you play Michigan. Like if they go 2-2 in these four games, and they get Boswell back up to speed, and Stojakovic is okay, like that might not be the end of the world. I think they
yeah,
can. They play Oregon and Maryland, who are the two worst teams in the conference. I know they're showing some fight, and Maryland has just won two games in a row against
yeah.
Minnesota and Iowa, and
What a big win
Oregon.
today for them.
Oregon
Yeah,
had the lead with under a minute left at Mackey Arena, but still, Illinois should take care of business there. So I think if you can find your way to two wins in the next four, and you can get Boswell up to speed, I think Illinois will be okay. Wow. They
yeah,
probably do have to win them all to get the one seed, but I think at this point, like with how little their depth is, I think they might have to just try and get through, just try and get to March first
yeah.
without losing any more players.
Yeah, and I think once they get to March, Boswell, Stojakovic are back. Nobody else gets hurt. This is a team that can beat anybody in the country,
Yeah.
regardless of venue. Especially, if they can get into a Final Four, the Final Four is in Indianapolis. It's a favorable location for the Illini. I know I'm jumping really far ahead right here, but I truly do believe Illinois is one of the best teams in the country.
Yeah, and they showed it there for uh, a long time. And look, they lost at the Izzone, where they probably should have won, and then they lost at home to Wisconsin, who Wisconsin is the only team to beat Michigan this year. They went to Ann Arbor and beat them, so it's not like this was a total fluke. Like Wisconsin's a tournament team with
Yeah.
a lead guard who's been to the Final Four before, and then another lead guard who is probably going to be in the NBA next year if he wants to be. So look, I think it was a tough run of circumstances here for Illinois, but I still think they're okay, especially if they can win a few of the next four and then get Boswell back. But the other game last night, Mike, was one of the all time classics, and I do not say that lightly, between Purdue and Nebraska at the bank. I did the live stream for it. It did great. Definitely going to be doing more of those in the future. Doing Wisconsin, Michigan State on Friday. That'll be the next one. And then we'll have to see about Saturday and Sunday. But this was a crazy up and down game, and I know we say that a lot, but that doesn't do it justice. 14-1 lead for Purdue out of the start. Purdue builds all the way up to a 21-point lead in the second half. Nebraska brings it all the way back down to 4. And then Purdue goes back, Mike, and pushes it to 14 with under 3 minutes left. And it looks like, oh well, good comeback, Nebraska, but you just came up short. But no, they find themselves with a free throw to take the lead with 10 seconds left. They miss it. Then they go to overtime. Purdue jumps out to an early lead, 7-0 run by Nebraska, and then Purdue finds their way across the line. So obviously, I'm tired after just describing that game. Can't imagine watching it, or I did watch it, but I can't imagine playing in it. But Purdue finds a way to get this victory. I mean, what a crazy entertaining game for somebody that does not have a rooting interest.
I mean, are you kidding me? This game had literally everything. It was a blowout. This game was over
And then it
around
wasn't,
halftime.
and then it
After
was, and then it
halftime,
wasn't.
and then look, as we said, Nebraska brings it close. I turned it off to I turned it to the Illinois Wisconsin game after this game was a 14-point lead for Purdue. The game was kind of over. There wasn't really much going on. And then the next thing I know, I'm turning it back, and Nebraska just gets an and one and has a chance to win the game. And they miss a critical free throw. They don't get the job done in overtime. I mean, what an up and down game of emotion this one was. Look, it's got to hurt for Nebraska. They're not winning any of their big games right now. They've lost 3 of 4. They're going to have some time to get some wins. They've got Northwestern, Iowa. Iowa's a decent team, but then they've got Penn State and Maryland at home before their West Coast swing kind of ends the season for them. So they're going to get plenty of chances to win. Games, but when you look at these 3 of their last 4 that they've lost, I think you look at every single one of those and think, man, those are opportunities wasted to one compete for a Big Ten title, but also to compete to get a 2 or a 1 seed in the bracket. And look, I think the Michigan game they really coughed up. This was another one that they really had a chance to do something remarkable, and they couldn't come through. For Purdue, let's kind of had to feel like, oh man, not again, because this team has kind of folded in tight games recently. They lost UCLA, Illinois, and Indiana all by 6 points or less. They did find a way to beat Oregon, who's not a good team this year, going into this one. So it's like, man, not again for the Boilers, but they're cool, calm, and composed going into overtime, and they find a way to get the win.
And the profile of this one, Mike, wasn't entirely shocking, but Purdue didn't build their lead by shooting a crazy percentage. They did it by getting offensive rebounds.
Yeah,
Toughness has been a real problem at times for Purdue this year. Not tonight. They win the rebounding battle 51-37. They have um, 21 offensive rebounds, and they rebound almost half of their misses. They shot 37% from the field. They were 13 of 46 from 3. They won by playing tough and making winning plays, not by making a ton of shots. And
yeah,
then in terms of Nebraska, I think that is sort of catching up with them a little bit. Like when they play an elite team, they win if they make shots, and they did early. Like when they went to Champaign and won, but they weren't able to drag themselves across the line a couple of the times when they didn't shoot it great. And ultimately, their percentages end up okay here because, when they started to make shots on the run, their defense played a lot better. And, that thing sort of goes together. But, Nebraska got punked here. I mean, and Purdue is
yeah.
not a team that I expected to do that. Oscar Clough with 11 offensive rebounds, which is they're 10 offensive rebounds, and then Kaufman Wren with 19 total rebounds, 16 on the defensive end. That is a profile that Purdue has not shown this year. Do you think that's something that they could maybe lean on a little bit more down the stretch?
Yeah, I think they're going to have to lean on that coming down the stretch. Yeah, like absolutely.
In terms of, I don't think that this result and this many offensive rebounds is attainable again for Purdue, being the fact that they probably won't miss this many shots very often.
Yeah, and I think
And
the other thing that this really exposes for Nebraska is
yeah,
they're just not a good rebounding team. They're a team that kind of hangs out on the perimeter, relies on making shots. They did not make a lot of shots in this one. It just made 12 threes. This isn't a team that's going to get down and dirty and win a game in the post. And that's kind of clearly why they lost and so emphatically to Illinois. Is that they just can't compete in the post with most of these teams. And I think that's why they're not going to be able to make a deep run in March.
and in terms of Purdue, Mike, I think there was a little bit here of realizing that bullying was attainable in this game, and they
Yeah.
did it. Like if they haven't been the best on the boards this year when it comes to effort because the other team like it wouldn't matter in certain circumstances. So I think there may have been, stepping on their throats here because they knew
Hmm.
that there was a chance to do it. So, I think this effort is can be replicated, but in the same area, like when they haven't been able to totally physical the other team, they haven't really done it to meet the other team. So,
Yeah.
look, I think this was a great win for Purdue. It looked like they had a huge statement win and then looked like they had blown it. Some good free throw shooters missing free throws. You know,
Yeah.
CJ Cox, after hitting two huge threes, misses two free throws, and it was just odd. But they find a way across the line here. And then in terms of Nebraska, Mike, I think teams had not been crashing the boards on them because their transition play is so lethal.
It's really
Sort of
good.
like a high
Yeah.
press in soccer. If you let them out, they're going to be off to the races and they're going to tee up threes. I feel like teams hadn't really been trying to crash the boards because they knew that that was a possibility. Well, Purdue
And
took
and
their
you
chance and it paid
you
off.
noticed that in the Michigan game, right? Where Nebraska led for pretty much the entire game. And then not really until like the last 5 minutes of that game did Michigan start crashing the boards. And that's how they went from losing to finding a way to win that game.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so like this one, I think changes the profile of a few the teams for a few different reasons here for both Purdue and Nebraska. There were some games tonight, Mike. Northwestern's currently beating Michigan by 6 in the first half. Um,
Yeah,
so we'll
we'll
have
see
to see
that
what
holds.
happens there. But in terms of the Big Ten standings, Michigan now has a game lead in the loss column as of
Yeah.
right now. It might be one by the time this game's over, but they've had some ugly first halves and still won before. But I think at this point it's Michigan's to lose in terms of the regular season title. You have four teams at three losses now, so there's a chance a lot of the teams still play each other again. So I don't think there'll be a five-way tie for the championship, but it's at least down to
Yeah.
five.
Yeah, it's down to five. Right now, Michigan definitely has kind of one hand on that championship trophy. You look at the rest of the season in conference, they do have some tough ones. At Purdue, at Illinois, and then at home against a really hungry Michigan State team that lost to them earlier on in the season. So they're going to have to earn this title, and they're going to also kind of have to find a way to beat Northwestern tonight. That one's a little tougher right now. But with that being said, they've got plenty of games. They've also got a random game against Duke next weekend. So that one obviously doesn't go on the conference record, but Purdue on the road, Illinois on the road, those are going to be really tough ones.
And then they host Michigan State on the final day, I think.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, I don't know if preparing for Duke in the middle of all this is great for their Big Ten chances. Now
I think they're going to lose that game and lose it by a lot.
they agreed to play the game, but in terms of like where they're at in the Big Ten, Mike, that is like if you want to win the Big Ten, you probably don't push your players a ton in that game. You already are a one seed, whether you beat them or not, and it's going to be in the Midwest if you're a one seed, no matter what, because Arizona is going to take the West and Duke is probably going to take the East. And even if a team like UConn or Houston jumps you, like it's Texas for the South region, so Houston will pick the South, and if
Yeah.
Iowa State or Kansas gets to the one seed, they'll pick the South. So this is obviously a great chance to solidify your spot on the one line for Michigan, but it is. I wish it was a little bit earlier. Like,
Yeah.
why don't we do like the
Absolutely.
last weekend in January? Maybe the weekend in between the Super Bowl or the conference semifinals and the Super Bowl. Why don't that be random non-conference weekend instead of this weekend,
This late.
which
Yeah.
where Duke Michigan is next Wednesday, I think.
Yeah.
But
But
Virginia,
it's
Ohio
next
State.
Saturday.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah. But like Louisville, Baylor's this weekend. You've got a lot of
Virginia,
random
Ohio
non.
State. Yeah.
Yep. That's another one in Nashville. So yeah.
Yeah. So interesting situation there. In terms of the outlook of the Big Ten, the tournament is a little bit different this year, Mike. We talked about this with Joe, but all 18 teams will make it, which means that there are Tuesday games now. The 15 through the 18 seeds will be starting on Tuesday, 9 through 14 on Wednesday, 5 through 8 on Thursday, and then 1 through 4 on Friday as usual. But it's pretty clear, Mike, that some NCAA tournament teams are going to be playing on Wednesday in the conference tournament, whether it's Indiana, Iowa, USC, Ohio State, if they make it there. So that is something to look out for. To my knowledge, Mike, and you can change this if you want, but I think this is the only tournament that has changed drastically from last year.
Yes.
I
100%. And I think part of it too is the relevance of the Big Ten.
Yeah.
I mean, the SEC, I will say the SEC has changed a lot since last year, just in a different direction
Well,
than
I
the
mean
Big
in
Ten.
terms of like the tournament
Um,
format. Like every team
sure. Oh,
makes
yeah.
it. Yeah. The every
Absolutely.
team didn't make it last year from the Big Ten. Yeah,
And that's what
Nebraska.
crushed Nebraska. That's what kept
Yeah,
them out of the NCAA tournament. Realistically, was not being able to play in the Big Ten tournament.
and then of course
Uh,
they won the crown, which, you know, of course that had to happen in year one of. But yeah,
yeah.
Joe and I think that this is a one and done, and we're going back to 15 next year. Um,
Yeah. I mean, I don't
but
know. I think the Big Ten is really kicking themselves after that whole Nebraska thing last year because
well, they
look,
were out. They were out of the field. But if they had
they
had a
were out,
chance to
but they didn't have
play,
a
and
chance.
yeah, yeah,
They didn't have a chance. If that Nebraska team gets to the semifinals,
oh
they're
yeah,
in the
they're
tournament
probably
next year.
in. Yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting to watch. That is getting closer than we think. Under a month until exactly a month away is Wednesday, the Big Ten tournament, and
Yeah,
Wednesday of every other conference tournament that plays on Wednesday. So it's
it's
getting
coming
pretty
up.
close. We've got some
Yeah.
cool stuff planned for some all conference teams with a couple of other creators. We're all going to submit a poll and then do some composite all conference teams and stuff like that. But Mike, we wanted to preview some games, but we're already over an hour here, so I think we're gonna wrap it up. Crazy headlines all around the sport. We went through all the conferences, how things are changing, and that's where we'll wrap it up. So thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.